same
Oh, you
things,
missed him.
That Bob just has.
Now he's on to the next
Justices.
guy.
Although I think that there's one, the quote from Justice Scalia, as I recall, it was that we must be fools for
Wow.
God's sake. And I
Can't
wrote him a note
believe
saying,
Paul
"Are you sure there wasn't
Brennan's
comment?"
great relative on his mom's
There he is, there
side
he
is
is.
on C-SPAN.
Take it.
Wow.
Anyway,
Are you taking a video?
Yeah.
I
Okay.
agree that that they are more outspoken about their religious faith in general. I think it could be partly.
Is there
because so many
video with
people
this?
are, you know,
Yeah.
You're recording
whenever
sound?
they say anything,
Okay.
people are watching much more than they used to. I think would not have been uncommon for justices to
How long are you going to take a picture of that?
just talk about their faith, but just people weren't listening.
The
maybe
whole
20
time,
years
was he?
ago. And maybe it's also the case
Paul
that,
Brennan, where are you?
and this may be stereotyping, but maybe Protestants speak less about their faith outwardly than some Catholics and some Jews. But in any event, what I would say in general is that I think it does have an effect on how they look at cases and look at life in the same way that, coming from Harvard or being born in the South might have an impact on their perspectives. It's just one of many cultural elements in their backgrounds, and even Justice Scalia has said, we come to the court, we are who we are. We come to the court with our upbringing and the elements that our parents brought to us in raising us, and we can't avoid that. But he has said, and they've all said, that we keep that separate from our professional lives. So I think it's just something that is of interest, and I think that they recognize too that this change has happened in the makeup there with 6 Catholics and 3 Jews. Justice Sotomayor just last Saturday at Yale Law School was recalling that she was talking about the kinds of diversity that the Supreme Court ought to have. It ought to have more people from different areas, more a civil rights attorney or 2 instead of a corporate lawyer. And then she said, plus we all believe in God. And that was was striking to hear that and to think that there is nobody on the court who is an atheist.
Wow.
I think you would argue, it's easy to we can talk about this later, but it'd be interesting to think about whether an avowed atheist could ever be confirmed to the Supreme Court. I kind of doubt it.
Has there ever been an avowed atheist on the Supreme Court?
I sure don't think so.
Wow.
But there aren't many avowed atheists in Congress either, for that matter.
I think Justice Cardozo was an agnostic, so that's partway there.
Yeah.
And I suspect they were atheists as well, but
Part way.
I'll wait till it's my turn.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, thank you. In some ways, I have to say I'm a kind of dissenter in this because I'm not sure that someone being a Catholic, being a Jew, or even a Protestant, that doesn't tell you much about how they're going to make decisions. Partly because there's so many ways of being a Catholic, so many ways of being a Jew, so many ways of being a Protestant. I do think that what you bring to the court, your experiences, your background, tells you something about how you're going to approach cases. And to that extent, I think, not to open up a controversy again, but I think when Justice Sotomayor talked about a wise Latina, there was some sense to that. That's what she was bringing to the court. There's no doubt that Thurgood Marshall brought a special experience at the court. And one, even if he was outvoted, I think the justices were sensitive to it. So I think we shouldn't over-determine the notion of the effect of religion. It's one of many things that are part of the influence on justices. Having said that, I think the topic is very interesting because there's no doubt that it has to do with the selection process. There's a sensitivity. I think it was Eisenhower. I was referring to the Brennan expert who said, "Find me a qualified Catholic." It has to do with notions of representation.
You want to get ready for bed, Lizzie?
I mean, the notion that
I'm
there was
still
a woman
recording
on
the
board
video.
was very important from the notion of representation. I suppose that the Protestants are upset that there's not a Protestant on the board. And it also raises a lot of interesting, I think, theoretical issues, because it goes directly to this question of, can you bleach out, quote unquote, to be a professional, do you have to bleach out your personal distinctions, your personal characteristics? And I think that was a notion of what it was to be a professional in the 40s and 50s and before. So you had this view that you're supposed to remove your Jewishness from being a lawyer, remove your Catholicism from being a lawyer. And I think we have a very different view of the world now. It raises some interesting problems and solves other ones. But I think we should be aware that we're living in a world where, in fact, not just justices, but all politicians are talking about their faith. I mean, only when I was working for George H.W. Bush, one of my jobs was to sort of take him around the Jewish community a bit.
Oh my gosh.
He could not stand wearing a yarmulke. He said, I'm like a poseur. And it had nothing to do with any negativity. It's just that he felt that his faith was private. He shouldn't be making a show of it. And I mean, whether or not politicians think that in their hearts now, they've gotten over it because they'll talk about it a lot. So, I mean, I think that's, it's no surprise that the justices would do so. So I think there's a lot of interesting issues in this whole question. And I think one of them really goes to this point that Justice Roberts said, that I'm just an umpire. There's a terrific quote, I didn't memorize it, but I did take it, by Gerald Frank, who was a judge and a Yale law professor, and he says, "Much harm is done by the myth that merely by putting on a black robe and taking the oath of office as a judge, a man ceases to be human and strips himself of all predilections and becomes a passionless thinking machine." I think that was in a Second Circuit opinion. But the point is that as much as justices say that's what they're doing, we have to have a question mark around that.
When was that quote? Do you know, roughly?
In the 40s,
Oh, a long
when he
time
was
ago.
on the Second Circuit.
Could we, Lyle, could we use that as a segue? Because you wanted to talk, I think, partly about how things have changed. I know you're an expert on Justice Brennan.
Okay.
Brennan.
Let me apologize first for my voice. This is the voice I was born with, and that's why I'm not a broadcaster. When I was in high school, I did sing in the choir, but every now and then Mrs. Peterson would stop and say, "Let's try it again without Lyle," which was the beginning to learn humility.
How mean.
Thanks, Amy, for having this event, and Charles for sponsoring it.
Is Brennan
It's
on
a
the way
fascinating
left?
topic.
Yeah.
They're talking about him?
No.
Pauline Myers'
Well, it
book
sounds
on
like it.
ratification
Yeah.
process of the Constitution, which is a fabulous-
Foot scam.
And it was interesting how often in the ratifying convention, the question of religious
Paul
tests
Brennan, where are you
of
now?
office came up as an
Elizabeth wants to know.
issue. And as you know, the Constitution itself
Paul Brennan is Enya's nephew.
insists that
Yep,
there not
we know
be
that.
a religious
Who's his uncle then?
holding office in the national government.
Bartley Brennan.
Really?
To a degree,
Someone
Yeah.
named Bartley?
traditionalists like me,
Yeah.
as a traditional journalist,
Bartleby? Bartholomew
this topic
Bartleby?
makes me a little bit uncomfortable because I tend to think that religion is a matter of private choice and private exercise, and that we should not, in fact, audit our public officials in terms of how well they serve
I
their
think this is
faith.
taking place in,
I must tell you that I'm married
Massachusetts?
to a Baptist
I think so.
Yeah.
who is a seminary graduate, who is about as rigid a separationist as you can find, and a lot of that has rubbed off on me. So I tend to be somewhat wary of this topic.
However, there are a few areas where I do believe that the religious preferences of the justices, or the religious identities, if you will, do have an impact. And I think the steady movement towards expanding the sphere of religion in the public square is in considerable part a product of the comfort with which certain faiths, particularly the Roman Catholic faith, has in, if you will, co-opting the government in order to advance the principles of that faith. And I think that's a very important influence in this court in steadily, sometimes precipitately, moving religion more to the center of public affairs. It is very different now. I do also think that the abortion question is now driven in considerable part by the Roman Catholic perspective on abortion. And of course, when you talk about abortion in this court, you have to talk about Anthony Kennedy, who probably holds the decisive vote on that subject. One cannot read his opinion in the Gonzalez case upholding the Part-to-Birth Abortion Act without seeing how he was, if you will, taken into camp by some pretty junky science about the way women react to the question of their reproductive health and how they suffer interminably a good deal of private agony after they've undergone this particular procedure. And so I think Justice Kennedy is acting out his faith in that area. It's always difficult. It's always difficult to know where Kennedy's going to wind up on any issue that involves liberty interest, because so much of his the whole Constitution structure and history is devoted towards the service of liberty interests. But when it comes to women's liberty interests, I think Justice Kennedy is pretty close to tone deaf in that area. Having said nothing controversial,
Stephen Wamil, I apologize. I misspoke. I think you are the author of a book about Justice Brennan. So if you want to take,
I'll consider Lyle a Brennan expert as well. Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about how, as Lyle did, how things have changed. Justice Brennan, I think it is fair to say, is the most ardent separationist in the modern history of the court, and I think he was that precisely because he was Catholic.
I don't think that's him there.
His Catholicism,
because they're saying was.
He believed
Lizzie.
deeply
So he's not
in
on
religion,
there right
but
now.
he believed that it was private and personal, and that having religion in the public square and in public life was divisive. For his 1966 to 1990.
Yeah, he died, Lizzie.
Participated in the decisions prohibiting school prayer, and was
No, he
by
didn't die.
the Catholic
I
Church
think so.
for doing
He
so.
didn't die. He's on the far left.
No, because they're talking about him like
to write
past
a separate
tense.
50-page
Why
No.
don't you look it up on the
second
computer?
school prayer decision
And you'll see it's not the same
1963,
person.
A case called Abington School District versus
No,
Shep.
they wouldn't
I was
talk
looking
about
that
him
over
like
again
he's someone in history.
today, apropos of the question, could we ever have an atheist on the court? Justice Brennan, in his opinion in 1963, talks about the establishment